If you were here last week, we finished the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus concluding parable about the wise man who built on the good foundation, right? The solid foundation. And one of the things I like to think is that when we come each week and we gather, whether you're online or here in person, the millions of people that have come today from Olney to worship with us, they're online, they don't know. We have a good crowd there. We have a good crowd. When we come to worship each week, I think that's a time where we're building our house. Each week we add something, we strengthen something, we add a decoration or we fix something. Actually, I think for me a lot of times it's just coming to fix something. Something's leaking. Something's broken. A wall needs a little extra paint. Some sheetrock needs some patching. You don't have to live very long or too many days in this world without getting a few nicks and scratches and bruises and some dents and holes in your house. And Jesus said if you build with him and you follow his teachings, that your house will be strong. And when the winds come, if you're online, you maybe can't tell how windy it is, but it's windy today. When the winds come, when the waters come, the rivers come washing in, the floods come, when the rain comes pouring down, your house will be solid. It will stand. The devil can't knock it down. But we have to learn to follow his ways. We have to learn to think like he thinks. We have to learn to put into practice the principles that he taught us. Otherwise, he said, when the winds and waves and rain comes, our house is going to be knocked flat, collapse. And some of us have been through that too. We know what that's like. And I think there's probably no more powerful time to build your house than every communion service. It's a time to recommit. It's a time to get it right. It's a time to remove those things that need to be removed and put in those things that need to be put in. And I know during COVID, many of you were probably doing some renovating projects, right? Seemed like everybody had some Corona project. Whether it was landscaping or doing something outdoors or doing something in your house. Home Depot and Lowe's have been making so much money, it's almost sinful. IKEA, you can't even get anything from IKEA. They're back ordered for months because so many people. Something about sitting in your house day after day that you go, man, I need to fix this and change that. And so you may have been doing that. We are working on a bathroom right now. And this week, as we were working on it, well, I'll tell a story first. I should say I took down a tree in my front yard. And it was rotting and needed to come down. So we finally felt motivated to do it, or I felt motivated to do it. And so I did. And as I was doing that, I saw that on the side of our house, there were these big carpenter bees or whatever they are, big bumblebees. And I had a problem where they would go into our house where certain cables went into our house. And they would come in, and then I would find them in our basement, which was kind of freaky because bumblebees do not belong in your enclosed basement. And there's no flowers, there's no nothing down there that they want, and we don't want to see them when we walk downstairs. So I found where they were going in, and I sealed it with this foam stuff. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like insulation? Yeah, everybody knows. This story does not have a happy ending. Spoiler alert. So I'm out there working on the tree and cutting up and moving the branches, and I see that these dumb bees have found another place with a different hole in our wall that I didn't notice before. The hole that I had filled up with the insulation, they could no longer get in. But now where the air conditioning thing went into the wall, I'm very professional, the air conditioning thing goes in the wall, and there's a gap underneath it, and I see these bees going in and out, big old bees. So I'm like, all right, time to get out the foam insulation and take care of this. The problem is the foam insulation had sat for a year and it was all clogged. And so I couldn't get it to spray. And I tried a number of things like a nail and things, to punch that stuff out, and it just wouldn't work. So I decided it's time to get the drill, because I'm a man, and any excuse to use a few power tools. So I got a drill bit that was nice and skinny. I started drilling it out, drilled out wonderfully, pulled it out, and the insulation sprayed everywhere. I was not calculating. I thought you had to tilt it or push on it to get it to spray, much like a spray can. But apparently just removing the clog is enough. And this stuff is not to be messed with. You can't get it out of... I was just praising God it didn't go in my hair, because I did cut my hair, but it was not because of that. But it ruined my shirt. And that stuff's under pressure. Let me tell you, it came out in a wave of just explosion. It was like a volcano. Went all over our fridge in the garage, all over a lot of things. And it doesn't come off easily. Let me just tell you, it's meant to be sticky, and it does a great job. So that was part of my week this week. And I was thinking about that because there are times in life when things just happen. They explode and you're overwhelmed. And you all of a sudden, like this wind that Jesus talked about, this rain, it's like a gust of wind that comes out of nowhere. And you're not expecting it. Now, honestly, we all can recognize foam insulation, as bad and messy and as a pain as that was hardly the worst thing that could happen in a given week. And some of us have had other experiences this week that are a lot more serious and a lot harder to take. But we come this morning to give them to Jesus. Because the story of Jesus is the greatest love story of all time. The church, he says in the Bible, is his bride. And he cared so much about her that in the end he sacrificed his own love for her. And during these times, as we've dealt with the pandemic and all the major changes that have resulted from that, all the things that have come with people having lost jobs and losing people, and we come to this communion with a lot of loss, a lot of change. And one of the phrases that we use when we experience loss is sometimes we say, just a wave of sadness came over me. A wave of anxiety came over me. A wave of fear. We use this terminology because it just feels right, like it's just this power of emotion that washes over us and we don't know how to handle it. We didn't want it. We couldn't expect it, but there it is. And we're overwhelmed. And it puts us under. I remember when I was just a young teenager, maybe 12 or 13, I got to go to the Pacific Ocean for the very first time. Now, I had been to Myrtle Beach. I had been to Florida beaches. I had been to beaches on the East Coast, the Atlantic. I'd been to the Gulf Coast. But the waves in the Pacific Ocean are different. And if you've been there, you know what I mean. In fact, there's two very different things. The water temperature and the waves is very different from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And so I was a young man, and I was excited because my dad had already warned me, and he had said, oh yeah, the waves are a lot bigger on the West Coast in California. And I thought, that's awesome, because there's nothing I loved more as a young man than just riding those waves with a boogie board or even just body surfing them. And doing that at Myrtle Beach could be a lot of fun, but sometimes the waves just aren't that big. And forget the Gulf Coast. And the Gulf Coast waves are like 6 inches, But even in Myrtle Beach, sometimes they're a little wimpy, and you almost want a little storm to go by so that as a kid you can get those big waves, and it's more exciting and more fun. And so we come to the beach this sunny day in California, and I look out there and I'm like, whoa, these waves are bigger. And I was so excited that even though the water was freezing cold, I still went in. And my brother and I were out in the water. We're turning blue, but we're having the time of our lives. And we're trying to catch these waves, and they're massive, and they're as tall as we are and taller, and then we're body surfing, and we're swimming and jumping and doing all the fun things that kids do while my parents are like in their jackets on the coast. And I remember being out there and saying, ooh, there's a bigger one. And I waded out a little further to catch the big one. But I got there at the wrong time. And the wave crashed on me. And I was ready because I knew it was going to happen. So I kind of ducked down and everything, but it didn't matter. That wave just churned me like I was in a washing machine. Not just once. I don't know how many times. I was trying to find the ground, trying to find something, but I was completely caught in the current, and it seemed like forever before the wave passed. And I put my feet back on the ground, and I stood back up, and I started spitting and wiping water off my face. And as I'm trying to recover, guess what's happening? Oh yeah. Before I can even hardly catch my breath, as I stand up, the next wave is just right there. And play it again, Sam. Here we go. Crash. I'm down under. I'm like, oh man, I didn't even get to catch my breath. And I'm trying to fight and find the ground and trying to get back up to get some air. I get back up, take in a deep breath, and guess what happens? The next one. Now by the third one, I'm starting to get worried. Because I'm not catching my breath very well between these. And these things are so powerful that I am suddenly realizing I am in a situation that I am out of control. I have no more control, and I am at the mercy of this super powerful ocean. And it is doing to me whatever it wants to. And I have no say in this. So then I'm just praying as I'm underwater, Lord, help me to get somewhere closer to shore away from these waves. They're killing me. And so I stand up, and the minute I stand up, I look around, I get the shoreline, and I just start to run until, boom, the wave hits me from behind, and I'm down again. But at least I got like 2 feet before it hit me this time. So I'm in a little, and down I go, and I'm churned again. And I get up and I do the same thing. And it takes me a few waves before I finally get into shallow enough water that I can support myself. I have enough strength not to get knocked down and churned up and spit out by the ocean. And sometimes life does that to us, right? Just when you think one wave is, you've just gotten through it, then the next one hits you, and then the next one hits you. And it can be really tough. And we can find ourselves just overwhelmed. We can find ourselves helpless. We can find ourselves feeling hopeless during these times. And Jesus was someone who wanted to show us how he can help us and how we can survive these times. And water became a powerful symbol for Jesus and the early church. And I was thinking about that this week, is water can do so much damage. It can be such a powerful force against us. Yet it can also represent a force that is for us. And so it says in Romans chapter 6, our scripture for this morning, and before we participate in the Lord's Supper, the apostle is talking about the power of baptism. And this idea that we are baptized into God, immersed The word baptism in the Greek literally means immersed. In fact, I just wish we would use the word immersed because that's really what he's saying. He's not even talking about this kind of ritualistic thing that we call baptism. He's in the Great Commission it says, you are baptized into the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You're immersed in God. The water is just a symbol. There's no magic in the water. It's about you making that decision to be immersed in God, in your Father, to give your life to Him, to surrender. So the Apostle Paul, he has these fitting words in Romans 6. He says, guys, don't you know? Don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus, were baptized into His death? See, there's this moment where you go under the water, and when you do a baptism, I always tell the people, I said, I'm going to push down a little on you. Don't panic. I'm not trying to drown you. But I want you to be under the water and have a moment under the water. Because sometimes we need that death. Sometimes we need to let something die. Sometimes we need it to be buried and gone in order that the new life can rise up. It's interesting that if you study our ecosystems in our world today, almost everything that grows out of something that has died. Our soil has no nutrients unless something decayed in the soil. We say, oh, you need some dirt to grow something. Well, you need some dirt, but you need something in the dirt. There has to be some nutrients, and those nutrients come from things that have decayed and died. And it's like Jesus was putting in the very fabric of our world this death and resurrection. And guess what? It's His death and His resurrection that matter. And His death and His resurrection become a symbol that we'll participate in this morning. Become a symbol of how we find that power, that resurrection power. How we find that life. How we find that Zoe, that abundant life that Jesus talks about. That abundant life that is God Himself. He lives in it. He is it. He knows it, and He wants to bring it to us. But He knows because of our sinful conditions, sometimes the only way we can get there is through death. And that's why the Apostle Paul says, guys, don't you know? If you gave your life to Christ, if you were baptized in Christ, you were baptized into His death. There are things you got to let go. That's part of the deal. If you want the new life, if you want the answers to prayer, if you want the power, if you want to see the miracle, then sometimes you got to go with Him to the cross. And you got to let something die, so that the new life can spring forth out of that. I think that's one of the hardest things for us. Because a lot of times what we need to let die is our own ego. I would probably rather have my car crashed and lose it than to lose my ego at times. Right? Like that, to admit you're wrong, to really look in the mirror and say, you know what? Oh, I really need to stop. I really need to change. I'm really not doing what I should do. I'm really not the person that I should be. And I've got to work on this. I've got to take this to Christ. I've got to give this to Him. Oh, that can be so hard. And it can be really hard in relationships because sometimes we may have to admit if we're coming to God and we're honest and we come before the cross and we see all He did for us, we might say, oh, maybe I need to forgive someone too. If He forgave me. That can be really hard. Because they don't deserve it. They don't. But we still have to forgive. That's hard. But Paul says to us, don't you know? When you were baptized, you went with Christ in His death. That's part of the deal. That's how this works. It doesn't work without the death. You don't get to skip the death and go straight to resurrection. There's no shortcuts in God's kingdom. If somebody's building you a house, do you want them to use shortcuts? We just put in whatever wires we had. Sorry, we didn't have any fuses. I don't know if those pipes are going to hold, but at least some water is getting to you. I don't know how much is in the wall, but nothing. I don't know if any of you have built a house, but sometimes you can get some construction people that will take some shortcuts to save some money for them, right? And I'm pretty sure you're not very happy if you find something like that, especially if it's putting you at risk. That can be pretty serious. But we often try to take shortcuts in our own house, our spiritual house. We want to get the quickest fix. We want to get it looking good. We want to get it fixed as quickly as possible. And sometimes we don't realize we're putting ourselves in danger. And God's saying, no, hold on. Let's do this right. Let's build this right. Let's get everything up to code so it will last. You'll be happiest in the end. I know it's hard. I know it's hard to let this go. I know it's hard to start working on this, to admit that this is a problem and that you got to deal with it and that you got to get the help and you got to work on it. But you'll be glad when you do. And we'll get there. If any of you have built a house, you'll also know it never gets done in the time you hope. Never. Ever. Anybody who has ever, tell me if I'm wrong, I have never heard anyone say, yeah, we started building the house and it got done before we thought. No. No, it's always, we couldn't get this permit and then that and then this and then there was this and we had to deal with and they were out of stock of that, so we had to wait a week. There's always something. You know what? If we're willing to wait for our own earthly homes, how much more our spiritual home? How much more our character? How much more what we're building with God that will last for eternity? So this morning I want to give you an opportunity. We can't do foot washing with COVID, but we can do something kind of special. And honestly, this came to me last night, so I sprung it on my deacon and deaconess team today, and I appreciate their willingness to work with me. I'm going to invite two deacons to come forward. I'm going to invite Willie, our elder, to come forward as we celebrate. And here's what the Lord impressed me last night. I want to give you an opportunity to do something like, and every week I'm hoping that something like this is here for you. I just want you to understand how I think of worship and how I think you can get the most out of our worship services here. This is an opportunity, a weekly opportunity to come and to deal with something you're wrestling with. To bring something to God that maybe during the week it's just been so busy and stressed and hectic you just hadn't even thought or had the time to really say, God, I need your help with this. So just as the devil can hit us with water, this morning we're going to come and Jesus is going to use his water to wash us, to cleanse us. So I want you to think of one thing that you want to give to him, one thing you want to let go, one thing you want to surrender to him. Now, what you and he decide to do after that is between you and he, and it depends what it is. And by surrender, I used to think as a young Christian, I used to think surrender means I don't do anything. I just give it to God and I pretend it doesn't exist. It's not necessarily that. Surrender means I don't have to have my way in this. God, you show me. What am I to do? I'm going to give this to you. I'm done trying to do it myself. I'm done fighting. I'm done whatever bad way I've probably been handling it. I'm now going to look to your way. And I'm going to do it in your spirit, in your power, with your wisdom. I'm going to be open. I'm going to be teachable. This is now yours. Whether it's a strained relationship, whether it's somebody you need to forgive or something you need to forgive in yourself, whether it's something that is an anger issue for you, whether it's an addiction issue for you, whether it's a behavioral issue, whether it's a trust issue, whether it's a fear issue. Whatever it is, I want you to pick one thing. We're going to come forward. I've asked the deacons, we have a pitcher of water, and we can't, of course, wash your feet, but we're just going to pour a little water on your hands if you want. And when you get that water on your hands and you can rub them together, it's just symbolic. But it's symbolic of God washing it away. You're giving it to Him. It's given to Him today. And after you do that, we'll have the water first, and then we have our individually wrapped juice and tiny piece of bread. We didn't realize quite how tiny these were till they came, so don't lose your bread. It's very small. But it's symbolic. And so we'll invite you to come forward, have your hands washed if you'd like, take your bread, go back to your seat, and then we'll have a prayer, and we'll participate at the emblem. So we're going to ask you to make a line kind of coming this way. We don't want to block the camera for those online. But if you'll just line up, we have 2 pitchers, so you can have 2 at a time, and then 2 baskets. And then make your way back to your seat, and we will have the prayer and participate in the Lord's Supper. You can come forward at this time.